Hello, at a new edition of Young Adult Festival powered by Cărți. We have today our guest from today, it's Rebecca Ross, the famous Rebecca Ross. And first of all, I can say about a few words about the book. We have also the translator with us, and I made the copy editing, I think it's called. I worked at the translation with Loredana to this two books, Letters of Enchantment, Divine Rivals. Okay, and first of all, I want to explain a few rules. I will present the author. I will tell a few words about the book, about the main series, which we will discuss tonight. And then I will address some questions to Rebecca. And after that, we can pick up questions from the guests. Is that okay like that?
You can raise your hand from the react button there, and one by one we will take all the other questions. Since we are so many, please prepare just one question per person. We don't want to keep Rebecca here for 2 hours. We have only 1 hour. So get ready and leave you back to you.
So Rebecca Ross is from Georgia, where she lives with her husband, a full of energy dog, and a mountain of books. She has a degree in English at the university from her state, and before she fully embraced a literary career, worked in tourism and school teaching. She adores the rainy days, the starry nights, the maps, the mountains, and the coffee. Her novel, Sisters of Sword and Song, and the Queen's Rising and Letters of Enchantment series are published in Romania by Leda Edge. The main book which we will discuss today will be, I think, Divine Rivals. This is a story where the gods and mortal coexist, and the main characters, Iris and Kit, two journalists, initially rivals at the same paper, the Oath Gazette, discover that they must pick up a side in the fight between two rival gods who want to conquer the world, and in the same time to fight against all odds and find their true love. So, Rebecca, if you are ready, I can address you the first question. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. The world in Divine Rivals is beautifully intricate. How did you approach balancing the fantasy elements with the historical war setting, and how did you decide on the type of divinity?
Yeah, so I feel like with every book I write, I always write about things that interest me. And I remember being a teen, I loved reading historical fiction. And of course, I loved reading fantasy books. So I think the unique thing about Divine Rivals is it really did take on like this world of its own, very different from my previous books where I often wrote more about ancient world building or medieval world building. So we see in Divine Rivals, it's a little more modern, and I just felt really drawn to this idea of these two reporters competing with each other in the beginning. And that was really like the heart of the story that I saw. And I knew that they were going to be exchanging letters somehow. And I had to ask myself, well, how are these letters being transported? What if there were two typewriters that were magically connected? So I really just began to ask myself questions about this idea because I saw Iris writing these letters to her brother who was missing. I didn't know why he was missing at the beginning. And then I saw this other boy receiving the letters. So it was this really interesting idea. And I was like, let me just begin to write and see what comes out. And that was the story. So it was something that, again, I think I was just drawn to these ideas that have intrigued me in the past, or just really just fantastical romantic ideas, and that really helped me build the world.
So you didn't have all the ideas since the beginning. You just write about them, and then they came along.
Yeah, I call myself a very character-driven writer. So almost all of my books begin or they're sparked into creation when I envision a character first. And I'm usually so intrigued by this character because I see them in a situation and I just have to ask myself, well, who are you? Like, where are you? What's happening? And then I sit down and I start to write. And I might also have a few really interesting ideas for the world, but a lot of my story, it comes together as I am writing it. So it's an interesting way of working where a lot of times I'm just having to trust this intuition. I don't have everything planned, so I'm just kind of discovering as I go.
I'm sure many of these questions you heard them a lot of times, but we have a lot of new guests here. Maybe they don't know all the details, and so that's why we have to ask them anyway.
Yeah, of course.
That is okay.
Mm-hmm.
You said in the interview how Divine Arrivals came after a month-long period of writer's block. What are some of your tricks now to come out of writer's block?
Yeah, so I love this question, especially if there's anyone watching who is also a writer. This does happen a lot of times. And I kind of describe writer's block as wanting to write, but then when I sit down, there's like no words. I just feel almost like empty or overwhelmed. Or there was one summer I had writer's block really bad, and I would write a sentence and then I would delete it and write a sentence and delete it. And it can be very frustrating. And so a couple of the things that I do is I like to keep a journal on hand. And this is actually the journal I have at the moment for the project I'm working on. So I have a lot of journals, but a lot of times I will just keep one and just write down ideas as they come to me. And I think something about writing by hand, also kind of getting away from the computer and just writing words on a piece of paper, sometimes I think really can connect and kind of unlock your imagination. But I always keep a journal. I let myself just, when I'm feeling really pressured and nothing seems to be working, just to write random ideas down. And that's actually how I did find the idea for Divine Rivals. It's also how I came across my adult novel, River Enchanted, was the same thing where I had a really long period of time where I didn't write anything and I was trying and I was like, oh, maybe there's no more books in me, very traumatic. But it really was, I just needed, I think, time to rest. And that's when also it's a great time to read and take in other artistic things such as music, art. I also love to play video games, anything else that's kind of, I'm still enjoying something, but I'm not having to create it. And it does, I think, inspires me. And so, yeah, sometimes just picking up a really good book or rereading a favorite book will also help get through writer's block.
Right. Iris and Roman are at the center of the story. Which character's side was the most difficult to write?
So this is interesting. So when I first wrote the book, it was all Iris's point of view. So I didn't even have any Roman chapters in there. And I have a critique partner named Isabel Ibanez, and she also writes young adult fantasy. So she actually read the book as I was writing it. So she has read it. It's a very messy first draft. And one of her suggestions after she got to the end was, I think you need to add Roman's point of view. And I was like, oh no, Isabel, I just wrote this entire book. Are you telling me I'm having to go back and add in Roman's point of view? That's just so much work. But she was like, I really think as a reader, I really wanted to see him and what's going on in his mind. And like when he's getting Iris's letters, like, I just want to know what's happening with him. So I decided to go back. I was like, well, let me just write one chapter from his point of view and see how it feels like. And I actually really did. I think he came very easily to me. And so once I started writing in his perspective, it came like I kind of knew exactly the chapters that I either needed to rewrite from his point of view or the chapters to add in from his point of view. So I'll say, honestly, both of them, I'll probably say Iris was easiest because she was the one I knew the best, like, right? Because she told the whole story in the beginning. And then, but I do think there's something really fun about writing about other writers, like both Iris and Roman love writing as well. So it just, I think there's bits and pieces of me in both of them. So, but if I had to choose, Iris was the easiest, and then Roman, then comes Roman. He wasn't too difficult as I thought he was going to be.
Thank you. You use the term a discovery writer. for yourself. Can you give us a little glimpse into your process as a writer? Did it change from one series to another?
Yeah, so the discovery writer, I heard George R.R. Martin one time say writers are either like architects or they're like gardeners. And so like the architects have the blueprint, they have everything planned out before they write the first word. And then a gardener is like someone kind of kneeling in the soil, digging around, finding things as they go. And so I'm like definitely more of that gardener. And I like to call a discovery writer because I do discover a good portion of the book in the moment when I'm writing. So I could sit down, and I've tried to do this. I've tried to sit down and plot a book out, and it just doesn't work. Once I start going, it just starts veering off. And I honestly think the best parts of my stories, they were never planned. They just naturally happened, or I naturally came upon them when I'm in the story. And that's why I feel like the discovery writing is such a magical sense of writing, because you really are tapped into this almost like supernatural thing. Like I would have never been able to plan that, but then I came across it. So at the same time, it can be a little bit challenging because you don't have an outline most of the time. So sometimes you're writing and you can feel like I don't know exactly where I'm going. So with Divine Rivals in particular, when I first started writing it, I was like, this will just be one book. And then when I got about halfway, I kind of had an idea of how it needed to end. And once I saw that, I was like, oh, I'm going to definitely need a second book. And then once I got even closer to it, I realized, oh no, this is how it needs to end. And I saw that last line. So I was like, okay. And I wouldn't have been able to plot that ending. I don't think it really came while I was like in the forest, like with Iris and Roman discovering where they're going. So it can be, like I said, really exciting. I love drafting because of this, because it feels so magical. But at the same time, it means revisions are typically pretty hard for me because I put it all on the first page on the first draft. So it can be all these ideas, all these things that don't quite connect. And then my revisions, I typically have to go back and do a lot of heavy revisions. But for the most part, all of my books do. They've all been written in a very discovery type way.
Thank you. Next question is, which one of your projects has been the easiest to write or discover so far?
So I will say Divine Rivals was so much fun to write. And I think I wrote it at the end of 2020. And I think most of us remember 2020 was just a really hard year where just a lot of worry, uncertainty. And so I think when I started writing Divine Rivals, I wanted to write a story that I wanted to read. And I wanted to read something that was very romantic. Like I wanted to see two people really coming through very dark, difficult times and finding each other. And so it just was like a complete joy to write that entire book. And I will also say A River Enchanted and The Queen's Rising are two other books of mine that I sat down to write them, and they just kind of like spilled out of me. Like they were just waiting for me to find the right characters. And funny enough, those three books I wrote them without any type of publishing contract. So I literally just wrote what I wanted to read. And I don't know, maybe that also, the pressure was off in some way because it wasn't under contract. So it is kind of interesting to think of that. But yeah, I would say those three books were both the easiest to write.
FestivalYA is a place for young adult books and books that are widely enjoyed by young adult readers. How do you feel that the young adult landscape has changed since The Queen's Rising?
Yeah, no, I think it's been really exciting to see young adult books really take off over the past, gosh, I'm trying to think of when Twilight first came out, because I feel like that was one of the first booms when we started really paying attention to YA. But The Queen's Rising, it published in 2018, and I think just since then, it's just been really incredible to see the journey YA has been on. I think we do see a lot of adults even reading YA, and I think it's because that's how powerful these stories are, this coming of age and discovering who you are. And I know for me, I've always loved young adult books myself, and I'm 36 and I still love to read them and I love to write them. And I just think it really does show how powerful these stories are. And so I think it's just been it's really incredible to see. 'Cause I've also encountered some people who look don't know if you'd say they would look down on YA, but they think it's less than adult literature. And that always makes me sad when I hear that, because it's like, no, like young adult books are really what have shaped us as people, especially thinking about coming through as a teen. Like the books I read as a teen were really transformative. So I think it's just incredible to see the, YA books getting recognized, and having a festival like this is really amazing.
All right, so we decided so far. We have a couple of questions. Actually, we have 5 more. But since we have a lot of guests here, I say it is better to let them put their questions. And if at the end it will be enough time, then we'll put our questions. Is that okay for you?
Yeah.
All right.
Hands already up.
Hands
Everyone is prepared. Since I saw Corina Mocanu be the first one to raise her hand, please, you have the stage. You can ask your question.
Hi, Rebecca. I'm sorry. I love your books. I just gave them to my mother to also read them because they made me cry, and I haven't cried to a book since a long time. I also wanted to ask you if you are going to write another book about other characters, as many writers do, or are you going to start a new series?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can't quite say yet. So what I'm working on right now is a secret, but I will say that I loved writing books in this world, and I loved all the side characters that I also created. So I understand why readers want more of them, because I do too. But yeah, no, I never say never as an author. I think in the beginning, I saw it just as a duology, but given just how well loved the books are, I have definitely let my imagination kind of wander to see, well, what else could we do here? So I can't quite give you an answer yet, but hopefully in the next few months, I will be announcing the next book that I'm working on. So, but I'm glad you enjoyed them.
Thank you very much.
Ioana.
Hi, Rebecca. It's so good to see you. I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, because Divine Rivals had found me at a time when I was struggling with my college applications. And I was an aspiring student for English literature as well. And I remember that conversation that Roman had with his father in the book, right? So my question is somehow related to this. I was wondering, of course, some of the episodes and the scenes in the books are from your own experience, I suppose. But what about, how do you find authenticity in scenes regarding your lack of experience? For example, as we see later on in the book, Iris suffers from PTSD. How do you precisely find authenticity in writing these scenes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in a lot of ways, it's just, I am someone, like I'm the type of person that's very sensitive to other people. I don't know if you call it like an empath, but I am very much in tune to other people, their stories, what they're feeling. Like when I walk in a room, I notice things like these really small details about people. And I think that's also why I love writing stories so much, and why I write very character-driven stories. And I think also, of course, there are going to be some things that I write about that I have experienced, like you mentioned, and then there's things that my characters may come across that I have maybe experienced in a different way, but not the extent that they have. And so I think a lot of times I just really have to either do my research and look at the situation, like what is it like to go through something like this? How would someone react to that? But also just think of it from a very human to human like perspective, like how would I, like if I went through this, how would I feel, and how would I deal with this, and how might it affect me? And so I think just really keeping a very open mind, but also being very sensitive to topics has helped me be able to write about things like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have one more hand up, Bianca.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, what would you change or add to Divine Rivals?
That's a good question. So I don't know if I would change anything per se, because I do love the book and how I wrote it. I think one of the things is I write very long books and sometimes publishers are like, this is way too long. We need to cut words because they're looking at it from the perspective of if we publish a book that's like 500 pages, that's a lot of money for us to print these books and the ink and the binding. And because I was not a New York Times bestseller yet when I wrote this book, you know, they really wanted to keep me at a certain word count range. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I could have just added a few more scenes and really made it a little bit longer because I love long stories. So I think on that end, I would have delved in a little bit deeper with a few things if I had had the chance to add more words, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hands are coming up. I was hoping I could ask something from the chat, but we're going through the hands. Adeline, you're next.
I don't really have a question. I just want to say I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate your book so much. It helped me during such a harsh time for me, and it made me believe like maybe things will go all right and everything will go all right. And they also made me cry, like Corina said. A long time I didn't cry while reading a book, but when Iris' mother died, I started crying, and I was like, oh my God, why am I crying? Why am I so invested in this story? And it was because you wrote it so beautifully and so lyrically, and I was just there reading the book and I couldn't stop. And I would just want to say thank you because these books are so special to me, and I'm so excited to read more from you.
Ah, thank you. You're gonna make me cry, like literally like getting teary-eyed. But no, that really means a lot to me. So thank you. I think as an author, I cannot even tell you how much it means to hear that from my readers, because it does. It's interesting when I'm writing a book, it's just me and I'm alone and it's just me and the words on the page, but then how incredible it is that those words end up reaching you and the story ends up reaching you all the way around the world, you know, and connecting us. So thank you. That really, I will cherish what you just told me.
We have questions from every place. We have questions from Instagram, from the chat, from the hands. Corina, you're the one with the hand up, the only one now. It's your turn.
Thank you. Actually, I have two questions, one from me and one from another friend. The first one is from my friends. Who is your favorite character from the whole duology?
Oh, that's a hard question. Okay. I think it really does it's really a tie between Iris and Roman. I just don't think I can choose between them. I really love them both so much. I will say Iris in particular, like I'm just really, really fond of her out of all the heroines I've written so far. Because I just think she's so brave and courageous. And I was like, I hope I would be as brave as her if I was in her situation and the things that she has to do. But I would say it is a tie between Iris and Roman for the favorite.
Thank you. And the second questions, wait a second, is what inspired you to write the relationships between Roman and Iris, that enemies to lovers? It's so old school, but so beautiful. What inspired you?
Yeah, I think I have, that's one trope that I love to read myself. So anything with like the enemies to lovers, I also really love rivals to lovers, which I think probably better suits when you look at Iris and Roman. It's not like they're trying to like kill each other, but they are trying to outright each other, and they still have kind of this begrudging respect for each other. You know, it's like, oh gosh, she can write good, and oh gosh, he can write good. So I really just love that trope as a whole, because I think it just makes for a very fun reading experience, because you see these two people who don't get along, right? And it's like, oh, who's gonna fall first? Like, what's, you know, when are they gonna realize it? How hard is it going to be for them to like actually, you know, get over themselves and actually make it happen? So it's just, to me as a reader, I just love reading it. So I think it just naturally came out when I was writing the story that I wanted to write something that I wanted to read. And like I said, it's just so entertaining. You have the forced proximity too, that, you know, they can't stand each other, but they're like right there, and it's just so much fun.
There are any changes that you got inspired from Romeo and Juliet?
Any inspiration from Romeo and Juliet? Is that what you asked?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I feel like Romeo and Juliet, they are definitely a classic, right? And I think they definitely influenced by stuff like that. So I'm sure, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Andrea, I know you're next, but I'm gonna ask one from Instagram, and I'm gonna remember you that you are next. Don't worry. A question from Instagram is, I would love to know some tips on how to improve my writing style because I always swoon when I read your work. You're so talented. Also, how many drafts do you typically need for writing a novel? Really curious about this one.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so flattered to hear that. So I think when it comes to writing, what has really made me a strong writer is, again, looking at stories like that I want to read. And so I think the more you read as a reader, you really intuitively know what works in a story and what doesn't work in a story, or what are the things that really draw you in. Like, do you love very character-driven stories? Do you love more plot-driven stories? I will say one of my favorite books is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. And I remember the first time I read that book, I was just like, I couldn't put it down. It's all I could think about. And I read it in like a day, and then I was sad it was over. I was like, okay, I read it as a reader first. Now let me go back and read this book as an author and ask myself questions like, okay, how did Naomi craft that first chapter? Like, what was it about that first chapter that caught my interest? Or how did she structure the romance? Or even how did she build the world? So I think me as a reader looking with a very critical eye as an author from books I love and authors I admire, that almost as if I was learning from them. So I think that's why reading your favorite books and like looking at them critically can help you kind of discover what are the type of stories I love, and then how can I make that story my own? And I think you make it your own because no one can quite write like you. So the things that interest you, and I kind of mentioned like, oh, these are elements like the rivals to lovers are something I'm really interested in. I love typewriters. I love very historic feeling novels. I love magic that kind of like simmers in the background. So I had all these things that I loved, and I just brought them all together in Divine Rivals. And that's what made it unique to me. So I think just, again, writing about things that you care about, that you're passionate about, that interest you, write a story that you would want to read is really important. And then as far as like the drafts go, I think it really depends on the story as far as like, is it a standalone? Is it the beginning of a series? It might change a little bit, like how in depth those drafts have to be redone. But let's say I'm working on a standalone. Because I'm a discovery writer, a lot of times my standalones will be pretty long, and I will just put all these ideas down. So the book truly I'll have my critique partner read through it. She's like the first person that reads it. She'll give me a lot of feedback. And then I take her feedback and revise it. And then I give it to my agent. And then my agent reads it. And then she gives me feedback. So then I revise it again. And then it goes to my editor. And then my editor gives me feedback. And it gets revised again. So it really is a big process of really going through. But I do find it's almost like when you have like a chisel and some marble, and you just kind of like chiseling away. And you finally start seeing the shape of something once you get through those revisions. And that's when I feel like it's very magical. It's like, oh my gosh, like I'm seeing the story really come together in a really like beautiful way, almost like a tapestry, where one side's like all these messy threads, but then the other side is like the picture. So I hope all that's helpful. I know I kind of gave a long answer, but I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Andrea. I didn't forget, it's your turn.
Thank you. So, hi, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be here and to listen to your point of view about these books. I have two things to say. First of all, I really love the friendship between you and Isabel Ibanez. And I'm waiting for a collaboration, maybe.
Maybe, you mean, it might happen one day. You never know.
I hope so. And the second thing is, I love the series, the Queen's Rising, and the story of Brenna and Cartier. And I really want to know if there will be another book in this series, even if it's in from another perspective, like another character point of view.
Well, first of all, I am so happy you love that series. I feel like that was my debut series, right? So that came out 2018, 2019. And I will say that the readers who love that series, like a lot of them have stayed with me throughout the years, and they've been with me from the beginning. So I always love, though, even when readers discover it too, it's always really cool to me. So at the moment, I don't have any plans to go back to that world, probably just because a lot of my ideas right now, they're looking ahead to new things. I've recently Actually, it was a year ago. I haven't announced anything, but I've sold multiple projects at this point. So a lot of new ideas coming in. So I don't have any plans to return, but like I said, I never say never. So if something came across my mind that I couldn't stop thinking about that was in the Queen's Rising world, I might seriously consider it, but then I also would need my publisher to get on board as well, because they also have to be willing to publish it. So I think a lot of times with publishers, they have to kind of see a need or a demand. So if readers are demanding another book in a series, publisher would be like, oh, Rebecca, you want to write another book? But if they're not, then they might be like, maybe write something new. So sometimes it really does come down to what the readers want. Publishers do like listen to that, but I never say never. So it maybe one day, if the right story came along, I would.
Okay, thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
I'm gonna take one from the chat because it's really interesting. The title, Ruthless Vows, suggests hard choices and sacrifices. Which characters' vows do you think are the most ruthless, and how did you explore the consequences of those decisions?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is it. That's a big question. So I don't know, are we doing spoilers in this chat? I probably should avoid spoilers, don't you think, for Ruthless Vows at least?
Yeah.
I'm gonna spoil it in case someone hasn't read Ruthless Vows. I think though, so we see in Divine Rivals, there are the vows that Iris and Roman exchange. And so I was always kind of very like one of my favorite things is that I love writing wedding vows for my characters in my book. So I did it for Iris and Roman, and I did it for another set of characters in River Enchanted. But just this idea of like how words hold weight and how when people exchange a vow, especially like between the gods, like how that is almost, it could be like a cage in a sense, or it could be something that you really grow from. But yeah, no, I think honestly, all the characters really in Ruthless Vows, they undergo some really difficult decisions, very difficult challenges and trials. And I think what I really was trying to express is that you have these gods, Staker and Inva, who are really powerful and are causing all this problem for mortal people in the world, kind of going back to their own, these gods had this relationship and they still have a kind of a score to settle with each other, and how people get caught up between that. And yet really the true magic and the true power is coming from Iris and Roman, these two people who you would think, just as a mortal, they're so fragile, but yet they are so strong. And it really is their vow to each other, that they're not going to abandon each other even when times get really dark. We see Iris really, and again, I don't want to spoil anything, but part of Roman's arc for both of them is like Iris is not going to abandon him. She's going to keep looking for him. She's going to find him. She's going to honestly be his way back home, right? And it might not be the easiest path. So yeah, I think as an author, I'm just looking at story as like, first of all, how can I keep this, a reader really invested in a story, and even take you by surprise, like I wasn't expecting this, or the twists and turns, but at the same time, really kind of showing, again, the magic of really being like, I don't know, a good person, again, like that is where the true power is with Iris and Roman, is their love for each other. And again, we even see it from the beginning with the typewriters. What initially connected those three was the sisterhood, right? With their grandmothers, and just the love from that is really what connects people and holds them together during dark times. So I hope that answered your question. I don't know if it did. I just feel like I'm rambling at this point.
And we're gonna take another one. Rafaela, I know you've been waiting.
Yes, hi. It's such a pleasure to meet you. My question is, at the end of the first book, we all know that Roman survives. Did you always plan for him to survive, or did you ever consider a more tragic ending, let's say?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your question. I always knew he was going to survive. I did not want to deal with readers just bawling if I killed him off. Because I knew readers would be very upset. And two, like the story would have ended, right? If he had died, there really wouldn't be a need for a sequel, because he would be gone. And so yeah, no, I wanted my readers to be like, oh my gosh, like really concerned and worried about him, like what's going to happen to him now. But he was going to make it through. So
Fair enough. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
Thank you
welcome.
for not killing Roman. I couldn't survive the series if you are going to kill him.
I know I've already racked up a lot of therapy bills for readers. So it's like I can't break too many readers' hearts here. Like, we have to make sure they still enjoy the story.
Speaking of survival, we have a question from the chat. Would you survive the worlds you created?
Oh gosh, you know what? Maybe only a few. I will say my worlds aren't too like I will say the Divine Rivals world is pretty deadly. But I think if I had to go visit one of my worlds, it would be the Isle of Cadence from A River Enchanted because it's like very cozy. There's like cottages, there's tea. So I was like, I would probably go there and I would survive there. But yeah, I think definitely I would be I mean, of course I'd like to visit all the worlds, but for sure I'd have to think about which one would I survive or have the best chance of making it through.
Thank you. We're doing a audience chat. So Ioana with E and then with J.
Thank you. So my question is still Divine Rivals related. I know that you mentioned at the end of the first book that the war story was basically inspired from World War I, and you mentioned some books and some movies like 1917 and Testament of Youth. And I was wondering precisely how much time did it take you to do this research and to incorporate details from reality, from history into this book?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's really hard for me to know really like thinking back how like an actual solid amount of time because I felt like it was a very organic process when I kind of got the sense of where the world was, right? Because I'm writing it and discovering as I'm going. So I had a couple books I would keep on my desk, and most of that I would kind of look at what was it like in the trenches, like how were they built? What were some of the dangers of the trench warfare? What did it feel like to be in there? What did soldiers face when being in there? To even kind of looking at how the British Army is organized, right? Because it's very vast. There's all these different like names and hierarchies. But I did really love both of the films I mentioned, 1917 and Testament to Youth. I will say the Testament movie was probably I just like bawled. It was like one of the hardest movies to ever watch. And it is based on a true story, like this woman's life and like the people she lost to that war. And then with 1917, I think what really struck me about that is how it was filmed. And you're like, the camera is behind these two soldiers going down into the trenches. And it's this very long camera take, right? So they don't break. They're just kind of continuously filming. So it feels like this is not acted, like this is like a real thing. And it made me almost like hold my breath. And I was like, I feel like that's how it really would be like in the trenches, where it's like you're really braced for anything to happen and holding your breath. So I will say, like, again, I just kind of kept a lot of information on my desk, like whether it was printed books or I'd be writing a scene and I would pause and like find something online. Yeah, it's very much woven throughout the whole book. So it really was just like this very organic writing, stopping to research, going back to writing, stopping to research, going back to writing, watching the film, listening to the music of the film, going back to writing. So if that makes sense, it was just very organic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And now Ioana with the J.
Hello. Hello. Sorry, I had a problem because I had to device it. So, I wanted to ask. First of all, I unfortunately didn't read the rival. Wait, I don't know the Divine Rivals novel. But I did read The Queen's Rising, and it was one of my favorite books growing up. It was like the first book that had like a major plot twist for me, and like I was totally shocked, and I was like, oh my god, this book is so amazing. I was, oh yeah. And I wanted to ask,
which book was your favorite book to write, and which was most fun to write?
Yeah, so again, I'm glad you enjoyed The Queen's Rising. I will say The Queen's Rising is really special to me because it was my debut book, right? So it was the first book that began my path to publication. I had been writing since I can remember, especially all through my teen years. I would sit at my desk and write stories by hand. So it's something I always wanted to do. So I think when I had that initial idea for Brianna and Cartier and The Queen's Rising, I was like, oh, I'm really intrigued by this. Let me sit down and write it and see what happens, you know? And the story really was just like this very magical experience. I drafted it very quickly. So again, it was almost just like spilling out of me. And I just remember just being very swept away by writing that book. And again, I wrote something that I wanted to read. I didn't have a publishing contract yet. It really was just this very special story to me. And then again, when it did get the publishing deal, it changed my life, right? So I do think looking back on The Queen's Rising, even though it's not necessarily my best known works, I know Divine Rivals is the one that has really reached more people. I do always love when I find readers who love The Queen's Rising, because that story it began my journey. I wouldn't have written Divine Rivals if I had not written The Queen's Rising. So that one was very special to write.
Thank you. And I wanted to also ask, when you wrote The Queen's Rising, you always wanted the love interest to be a professor? Because when I first read it, I was like, oh, okay.
You know, I kind of saw him more as like her mentor. But yeah, no, it's just how it was with them. Like it's something so the first thing I ever envisioned for that story, the idea that the whole story grew from was Brianna and Cartier sitting at a table in this beautiful library. And I didn't know who they were yet. I saw there's a young woman and a young man sitting at a table. And it's almost like I just interrupted a conversation of theirs. It's like he had said something, was waiting for her to reply. It's like, well, what's going on? Who are these people? So it's like beautiful, like books on the shelf. There's like sunlight coming in through the window. It's just a very beautiful scene. And that's when Brianna, she said to me, the summer solstice is in 8 days and I have yet to master my passion. And I remember thinking like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, who is this guy? And I was like, okay, well, he's trying to help her, like either learn something or he's there to help, you know, mentor her. And she is struggling because she just doesn't feel like she fits in, doesn't belong. So what is her path? So I took that idea and I just ran with it and see what is this world? But yeah, no, I always kind of saw them like that, how their relationship was. And I wanted to keep it very respectful, right? So it's very respectful. Yeah, that's how it began. That's the idea that it sparked from. There was both of them sitting at the table.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. And now for a very popular question, of course, what is your dream cast for Divine Rivals?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I will say I have been asked this quite a lot. And the funny thing is, I've actually never cast them officially. And I don't know if it's just because I have not come across like an actor and actress who I like immediately makes me think of them. So I always love to like spin it back to my readers, like, well, who would you cast? And it's interesting. I've had a few people would have cast Roman. Oh goodness, I'm gonna forget his name. I think his name is Jonah, and he just played Prince Eric in the Little Mermaid live action, because he has the dark eyes and the kind of the blue eyes, a very soulful look about him. But I've never had someone cast Iris before. So again, I think if this ever got turned into a movie, I would want to see maybe like an actor and actress who's up and coming that maybe they haven't had a big role yet. So someone really fresh and new. But I personally love to ask readers the same. So like, who would you cast? And it's always interesting to me to see like what actors and actresses they think of.
For everyone here, right after we finish this live, go on Instagram, cast your favorite actors or actresses and tag Rebecca and see.
I would love to see. So yes, please do.
And now for one of my favorite questions that we usually ask the authors, and thank you, Christina, for asking it. What are some of your favorite books other than Naomi Novik's Uprooted? that you enjoy and loved?
Yeah, okay. So I have a few that I feel like have been really transformative for me. So one of them is Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marie. It is a beautiful Celtic inspired fantasy, and it's about really this love that this girl will go through to save her brothers from this curse. And it's just very beautifully written. I remember the first time I read it, I like bawled, like I just like cried. And I went out to dinner with my husband that night and was trying to tell him about the book and like cried again in the restaurant. He's like, what is going on? Like, he's not a big reader, so he just thought it was funny. Like, what is she talking about? But he's like, that book meant a lot to you, didn't it? It's like, yes. I have it right here on my desk. Actually, I love Circe by Madeline Miller. I think her writing is just absolutely gorgeous. It's one of these books. I actually don't annotate a lot of books, but I was like, I have to underline stuff in this book because she just writes so beautifully. I also have another book on my desk that I really love is Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. This is really impressive debut, very epic world. I remember the first time I read it, I was just like really blown away. So I love that one. And then I'll also say I really love Melina Marchetta, and she writes basically everything. So she has written, she's like an award-winning author. She writes YA, she's written adult, she's written thriller, she's written fantasy. I honestly, if I met her, I would not even know what to say. I'd be fangirling so hard. But I will say I loved her, the Lumitere Chronicles, which is her young adult trilogy, Finnegan of the Rock, Freud, the Exiles, and Quintana Charin. I think I still think about those characters in that story, and I think she just writes characters so beautifully, and they feel so realistic, right? Like their lives are messy, and it's, you know, things are difficult, but they love very fiercely. And she had me just like crying over secondary characters. Like that's just how good she writes. So I always recommend those books as well.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning those books because I love them so much. And I find it rare. I rarely find people that have heard about them, mostly because I don't think that they were taken over by an American publishing house. I know it was very hard to buy them in Romania, especially. I had to like jump through hoops to have the
I
editions for
could
them.
see you light up. I was like, oh yes, I found a fellow fan, because it's the same way. I'm always like looking for people who had also read the books and loved them. But yeah, they can be hard to find here, even in the States, because I think she's from Australia.
Yeah.
And I just wish I wish more people knew about her and like her books were on the shelves because they're just so good.
Yes, and her YA is amazing. I love them. But I'm not gonna take much time. Amon, I know you were the first one to raise your hand. You have the stage.
Okay, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I finally got into the meeting. I had some issues. I was the person who asked you about the drafts, and I just wanted to say I absolutely adore your books. I have them here, and I finished A River Enchanted last night, and I think that Jack and I don't know how to pronounce her name, Adara.
Yeah.
I think they're my favorite couple, and I would love to know if you've ever thought about a song for them.
Oh, well, first of all, I'm so glad you enjoyed that book. It's funny, most people love Torrin and Sidra the most in that series. So whenever I hear someone love Jack and Adara, it always makes me so excited. So I have a playlist for all of my books on Spotify. So if you are interested, you can go and listen to the music that I listened to when I was writing the book. Definitely go check it out. My Spotify is the same as my Instagram handle, Becca J. Ross. You can find me on there. All my books have their playlists. And so, yeah, I think you probably really enjoy it because it has some really beautiful harp music in there that makes me think of Jack. Some Celtic music, like from Braveheart, that again makes me think of Scotland. So yeah, definitely go check it out and then let me know what you think about the playlist.
I totally will. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We have 10 more minutes. I'm gonna ask Rihanna to ask her question, and then we'll see if we can have two more questions from the chat, so we don't keep Rebecca and overwhelm her with our questions. Eliana.
Thank you so much. So I am very happy to be here, and I wanted to thank you first of all because Iris, as a character, actually inspired me to compete in several creative writing contests in here in Romania. And I also wanted to ask you, what helps you actually write out the beginning of a book? Because I have one book already planned out, and I see all of these scenes in my head, but I just can't get past the first 3 chapters of writing, of actually writing it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so excited to hear that you have been submitting your work. That's amazing. It's really one of the first things to do is when you write, put yourself out there. And so congratulations on that. Okay, so one of the things sometimes when you're trying to get a book going and you can feel like, oh, like it keeps either fizzling out or you're just kind of not sure how to keep momentum going, is just to remind yourself, I think at the heart of every book, it's about a character who wants something and an obstacle gets in their path. So maybe if you are struggling, look at your main character and ask yourself, okay, well, what is it that they want? What is going to happen in their life that's actually going to prevent the obstacle or really make them change their course, or maybe even affect exactly what they want? Because sometimes what a character wants in the beginning, it changes by the time they reach the end of a book, right? Because change has happened, they've grown, they've had this character arc. So I would look at your plot, maybe even like what are like the big moments in the plot that I'm working towards. And sometimes because I am a discovery writer, I don't necessarily plan things out. I do know my characters. And sometimes I'll envision a scene like, oh, I see this as like a big important scene happening, but it's a little bit further down the line. And I will literally dangle that scene like a carrot, almost like how a horse is like, oh, the horse will follow a carrot. Like, okay, like this is the scene I'm working towards. Like, let me sit down and actually spend time getting words on the page, especially if I'm feeling stuck, like this is where I'm going. So maybe creating, like looking at your story again, like what are the scenes that are coming up that you're really excited about, whether you've plotted or if you're like me, you've kind of just envisioned these really big moments for your characters that excite you, and then make a plan to get to it. And sometimes like I write very linearly, so I need to start with chapter 1 and write my way all the way through, but some people actually can jump around. So I think it's also figuring out what works best for you in your mind and your creative process. Do you need to write linearly? Do you want to jump around? But again, remember, just at the end of the day, your character has to want something and something has to get in their way and really create that challenge and obstacle for them. So I hope that's helpful though.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask one from the chat and then Loredana, you can. I felt the vibes from the movie You've Got Mail and Divine Rivals. Do you feel inspired by other media you consume, like movies or video games?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's like one of the things I mentioned when I'm having like writer's block, or even when I finish writing a book and it's like, oh, I'm off deadline and I'm exhausted because I've been working so hard. And it's almost like I need to really escape into someone else's world for a little bit, whether it's a movie or a book or video games, as I do love. I have a PlayStation, so I love playing my PlayStation because that gives you almost like a story, but it's a visual and it's music and it's like very engaging. So those are definitely ways that I like to really refuel my well. And of course, I'm always getting inspired by anything and everything. Anything you could think of, I could find a story within. But yes, You've Got Mail is one of my favorite films. And so I always knew that one day I was going to write a story about 2 characters that don't like each other in real life, but fall in love through letters. And so when I had this idea strike me with Iris writing letters to her brother, and her brother's missing and the letters are being misdelivered, I was like, oh, this is a story I've been waiting for, my You've Got Mail story. So but yeah, I do think it's important, especially as someone who's really creative, that you're always kind of taking in other people's art and creation, because it inspires you in turn.
Thank you. I would ask what games you're playing, but I promised Loredana to be the next one, so Loredana.
Dear Rebecca, first of all, thank you for gifting us this story. And I have to thank 2 times because I'm the translator for the Letters of Enchantment series. So I had the chance to work for a couple of months on this incredible project. And it was such an experience, and it was at times overwhelming, but I think in the end we had a beautiful result. And the thing is that the readers are happy with it, so that makes me happy. So as the translator, I have to ask you this. Do you ever think about your books, how they're going to sound in a different language? Do you ever have this moment like, oh God, I really hope this scene or this phrase is going to translate well and it's going to be understood as I want it to be understood everywhere in the world? And again, thank you so much for everything.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, first of all, I am just really honored to have the chance to meet you. So thank you for translating my books. I mean, that I am really in awe of you, and like being able to translate something like that, that is really incredible. But just think like you have helped make my book reach so many other people, you know, which is just really incredible and to think about. So thank you. I'm just so honored. Okay, so to answer your question, I don't think I've ever like thought about that before. I probably will now. But no, like I haven't really been like, oh, you know, how is this going to translate? I will say, because I think even when I'm writing a book, I don't know how it's going to perform, if it is going to even sell to other countries, right? Because I've had some books that have sold a lot and other books that have not sold as many to translations. But I will say it's always interesting to me when we come down to the title, because sometimes the titles just do not translate well. And so I think, oh gosh, I'm trying to think. There was one in particular just recently. It was my Italian title for A River Enchanted. I think they're like, hey, could we change this to The Melody of Water? Because River Enchanted, it sounds a little too like young over here, or it just has a different meaning over here. And so I was like, oh yes, absolutely. Like The Melody of Water is beautiful. So I always love to see, and I think even my Spanish translation, I think with Ruthless Vows my Spanish editor's like, this is not going to sound right in Spanish. So we need to change it. And I think they ended up going with Cruel Promises. And so I always just love to see, like, really to think about, yeah, like words in English and then how they would translate, or even like the ideas that follow them. So again, so much respect to you and what you do, because I can only imagine how difficult it is, like really trying to capture not only like the words on the page, but also that essence of what I was writing, like that you also capture it. And that takes so much skill and talent. So thank you.
No, thank you. And I really hope I made you proud.
I know you did.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have one last question. Some of you asked some questions, but they already were answered through our discussion. If you could live the life of a character from any book, what character would you choose? So not your own book, any book.
Any book. Oh my gosh. Okay. Live the life of a character from any book. Let me think about this for a minute, because even me thinking of my favorite novels, like those characters go through some very difficult things. So, okay, so I'm actually going to say, I'll probably say Lucy from the Chronicles of Narnia, because when I was a little girl, I was obsessed with the Chronicles of Narnia. And you can see, honestly, the word, like the letters coming through the wardrobes, that is like a nod to C.S. Lewis, because those books were, when I was a kid, I just wanted to get to Narnia so badly. And I had this kind of interesting closet in my house that you would open and there's like a step in the closet. And I would go and sit in that closet and like try to get to Narnia so bad. And of course I never did. But I would say C.S. Lewis was really one of the first authors that made me fall in love with stories and fantasies and magical worlds. So I would be Lucy, so I could go to Narnia and actually make it there through the wardrobe.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I think we have come to an end. We don't want to keep you any longer. And I know there have been many questions, and there would be many more if we stayed. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for everyone who came. Thank you, Liviu and Loredana, because
Welcome.
you are the people behind everything that means Divine Rivals, and you brought this wonderful book in Romania and all her other books. So thank you very much. Hopefully, maybe we'll see you next year, who knows, with a new book.
Yes. No, I just want to say thank you all so much. I honestly, one of the greatest honors of my life is seeing my book translated, and knowing it has reached readers again in other countries around the world. I think it's just really so humbling to me and just such an incredible honor. So thank you for publishing my books over there, for translating them, for reading. I really appreciate even being invited to participate in this festival. So I hope the rest of the festival goes well. And yeah, you hopefully very soon, next few months, I will be announcing the next project. But again, thank you. I really appreciate all of you, and I wish I could give you all a hug.
Liviu?
That was all. Thank you very much. And it was an honor to have you here with us. And hopefully we will see you again, as our guest said.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.